I'm very honored today to be interviewing Jennifer Fink, a caregiver for 3 generations affected by Alzheimer's. She launched the Fading Memories podcast, and one purpose was to help prevent the disease and to support fellow caregivers. She's interviewed caregivers, experts, and those with cognitive impairment to broaden her understanding of brain health. She fosters a community where shared wisdom can make a difference in the lives of caregivers and those impacted by dementia. You suggest learning all you can about the disease. How does that help the caregiver?
It helps dial down frustration because, unfortunately, there are many aspects to the disease that make you want to like tear your hair out, like repetitive questions, anxiousness. Um, you know, it gets very tiring to answer their question over and over and over again. And so the more you understand about what is going on in their mind and their brain, the progression of the disease, it should hopefully give you just a little bit more, a little another tool to work with so that you don't just throw your hands up in exasperation and make more issues with your loved one than there needs to be.
I found, thank you for that answer, and I think it's such a wise piece of advice. I found that many of the caregivers I'm interviewing end up doing something very creative with their experience. So tell us how that is true for you as well.
Well, when I went looking for advice, so my dad passed away. I had to move my mom into memory care, which was the best decision for the entire family, including my mom. So when I went to visit, she was very happy just sitting around shooting the breeze, which would have been fine. But she asked me the same question every 2 or 3 minutes. And after you've answered it, 5, 6, 7 times, you're like, okay, now what? Like I got dinner to cook, I got a photography studio to run, I got life to lead here. You know, how do I make this better for both of us? When I went looking for advice, I could not find anything that worked for us. I like to say that mom and I flunked all of the standard advice with flying colors.
Okay.
A lot of people say, like, oh, music therapy, it brings out, deep memories, which is very true. But my mom liked talk radio and talk TV. So I really should have played her podcasts, but I didn't want to play her mine because I was afraid she'd realize we were either talking about her or talking about Alzheimer's. I didn't know of any that I thought she could track with. Honestly, now that I know more, I think she just probably would have been happy just hearing the voices and the back and forth and the melodic sounds that voices generally um, sound like when you're listening to people talk. But I didn't, so we tried everything and it's nothing worked, and it was so frustrating. And I was back in the old days when you actually drove to the gym. I was like, duh, I should look for a podcast for caregivers. And this was mid to late 2017. So podcasting was starting to have a bigger resurgence because the pod players had come out. And I went home and I looked, and there was one. And for better or worse, it was not my cup of tea. They are still around. They have a very excellent business. So this is no shade to them, but I like tea. Other people like coffee. That's how the world goes around. So
Right.
I discovered that I thought in the beginning I had a lot to share. Like I had a lot of knowledge, and it didn't take very long to find out I had not very much knowledge. So I
Okay.
started seeking out guests who could help me with issues I was having with my mom or anybody that was dealing with Alzheimer's or other form of dementia in a creative and different way than, say, the last person. And I've interviewed a lot of people that I call caregivers turned creators, people who have written books, made apps, courses. There's just a plethora of items and things that people, navigating this journey can reach for. And it's really fun to interview caregivers that have created that.
And you also mentioned the podcast is for the purpose of learning about the disease. What have you learned that surprised you?
Oh my goodness. Well, my mom passed away at the start of the pandemic, so March of 2020, and I am still learning best caregiving practices. So the more, unfortunately, the more people that are on this journey dealing with a loved one or a family member, hopefully you love your family, the more people are sharing, the more knowledge that's out there. So, one of the it's a funny story, and it's something I truly wish I had learned before my mom had passed away. I had a guest who was on twice. She's a dementia coach. She has her own support group that she facilitates. And we were chatting. I think before we were recording, I mentioned that my mom was the oldest of four. And then we got to chatting some more, and we were talking about dealing with triggers and things that uh, excuse me, goodness, things that, would set them off or, create anger or anxiety. And you could almost see the little light bulb go off over her head. And she's like, you said that, excuse me, your mom refused to walk next to you. So my mom would literally walk 10 or 15 feet behind me, holding her hand. So she'd be wringing her hands, looking at her feet. And nothing I did convinced her to walk next to me. And
Yeah.
a lot of that's because they don't have peripheral vision, so they can't see you. So I understood all that. I understood all the reasons. But I was terrified that she would face plant on the sidewalk. I would be the monster because I didn't let her catch up. And I mean, it was just going to be ugly multiplied. And this guest said, wait, your mom was the oldest of four? She walked behind you because she was paying attention to the kids in front of her, her siblings. I was like, where were you 3 or 4 years ago when I needed that information?
Wow.
And
So,
and that helped because one of the common pieces of advice is, be with them in their reality, but nobody freaking explains what that means. Or
yeah.
at least they didn't when I first started caring for my mom. And that's exactly what they're talking about. It's like my mom wasn't walking with me, who she thought I was her best friend. She was somewhere else back in the 50s, early 60s, back in the 50s. She got married in 62. So, and it's like just that little nugget of information would have made the biggest difference. I don't know how I would have utilized it, but at least I would have known like one more way to maybe try to get her to walk closer to me.
Well, at least you wouldn't have felt like you were to blame for letting her lag behind you.
Unfortunately, she never fell, never face planted on the sidewalk. So I never had to deal with that because that would have been just really ugly. And I would not have wanted that for either of us.
No, of course
Oh
not.
my goodness.
What are the primary ways that you learn to take care of yourself, that you prioritize self care?
Surprisingly, people talk about it a lot. And I had just turned 50 when my dad passed away, which was why I became responsible for my mom. And I had my own photography for studio business. And I had been on a huge weight loss journey. And my daughter had just moved out, and I was like, excuse me, but like I have been visualizing the empty nest part of my life. I'm not ready to give up any of that. And
Yeah.
so I just figured out like there's got to be a way to do what mom needs and do what I need. It wasn't easy, but it's very, very necessary.
You had to make some really tough decisions to make sure that your well being wasn't sacrificed in the name of taking care of mom.
Exactly. And
Good.
her being in memory care did help because that took the 24/7 pressure off. I
Yes.
got to go back to not the relationship we had before, because like I said, she thought I was her best friend, which I kind of jokingly say is probably an upgrade. I
Okay.
mean, it's so many people are really devastated when their loved ones, forget them. I try
Yeah.
to share that they don't really forget you, they just forget the words that describe the relationship. You know, the way you make them feel is more important than daughter, spouse, best friend, whatever. she would tell people, she's my best friend. I've known her forever, which would make people laugh because, yeah, Dell, you have kind of known me the longest.
Yes.
And then she would laugh. And so I was always like the feel good, fun person, which was always a challenge when I had to take her to the doctor or something because she hated that.
Okay.
But I didn't let like the doctor's office or the staff at the memory care residence that she was in. I mean, I couldn't allow them to disrupt clients, but I also didn't let them disrupt my self care, my gym time, my cycling with my cycling group. It
Uh-huh.
was just like, this is just as important as my work. So, goodness gracious, I haven't been talking all day, and now it's like my
Hey,
voice.
it's okay. No problem. You said that you prefaced any visit with your mom in the memory care facility with an enjoyable self care activity. Was this a bit like fortifying yourself for a visit you knew would drain your energy?
It might have. So I was a Rotarian, and our meetings were lunchtimes on Monday. And
Mhm.
so I was already out of the house, and it was much easier to just drive past our neighborhood and go visit mom than it was to try to be like, okay, I'm going to finish my work at X o'clock and, drive over there. And so just you asking that question makes me think that maybe that was one of the reasons I did choose that. Like subconsciously, it's like, I'm with other people and I'm doing, community service and
Mhm.
having an enjoyable lunch most of the time.
Uh-huh.
So there might have been some subconscious decision made because it was like I went to the gym, I'd go home, shower, dress, go to Rotary. That was an hour and a half. There was generally a speaker and 99% of the time really good food.
Uh-huh.
So probably subconsciously I did realize it was like taking care of myself and then fortifying myself for a visit with her.
I had a difficult relationship with someone once that I made appointments, regularly to stay in touch with, but I would fortify myself by doing something nice for myself ahead of time and afterwards. So tell me, what role does art have in self-care?
Well, for me, and I wish more people would do this, any creative endeavor, dancing, singing, painting, whatever, fires up all of the regions of your brain. And it's
Yeah.
also meditative. So during the pandemic, we had downsized. The last 5 years have been a lot. We downsized January of 2020, and the pandemic started, and my mom died. It was a lot. And
Yeah.
as part of the downsizing, I got rid of probably 90% of my crafty stuff because I was looking for a craft that did not clutter up the house. The neighbors weren't going to run away if you were coming at them with it's like pile of zucchini. It's like, no, no more zucchini.
Uh-huh.
And during the pandemic, I stumbled on handmade card making. And I'm like, oh, that looks good. You always need greeting cards. You make them and then you give them away. So, you're not cluttering up the house with some, you know, painting that, you attempted or, another knit thing. It's like you only need so many Afghans and scarves and all that stuff, but you always need cards. And people love getting handmade cards. So I started doing that, and I get a little anxious if I don't have that creative time because, and I partly that's because that's who I am, but it's so relaxing. And like I said, it fires up all the regions of your brain, which is
Yes.
healthy. And it's also meditative, which I'm trying to get into morning meditations, but Lord, I would rather craft.
I know. I can't sit still and just let my mind go blank. I walk, which I think is a kind of meditation, and I also do some art things that I find restore my energy. You are attempting to train corporations that the elder care crisis is already costing them money.
Yep.
You suggest that they invest in their working family caregivers.
Mhm.
What kind of response are you getting?
It's been a challenge because they don't seem to be aware that this has been a problem like for years, and it's just getting worse because we're more of us are aging, and there's more people having to leave the workforce. I know people in their 30s that are taking care of parents or grandparent full time, and
Well,
I have no one of them will probably be fine. She's a teacher and very smart. So has it been almost 3 years? Dear God. She's been out of the workforce for at least 2.5 years, 2 to 2.5 years. Yeah, I think it's 2.5. But the other one was, shall we say, less employed. I don't, does not have an advanced degree. Let's put it that way.
okay.
And she's taking care of her grandmother. Both of them are doing such a great job. These two ladies are really hanging in there. And what's going to happen when they try to return to the workforce? But what corporations don't seem to be asking enough about is, why are you retiring kind of early, kind of suddenly? Why are you moving to part-time? Why are you refusing this promotion? you know it's like you've got people like me that are in the prime of their careers, that the senior portion of your career, I suppose you could say. And a lot of workers are facing sandwich caregiving, which I have just recently found out is not a term that most people are familiar with, which just blows. I'm like, sorry, but it hurts my brain.
Say that term again.
Sandwich caregiver.
Sandwich caregiver. Yes. Okay.
Are you familiar with that term?
Yes.
Okay. I'm like, so I had a friend of mine who is retired, but managed facilities and people, and, raised three kids and took care of family members, so it's like, and he did not know what that term meant. And it was like, that hurts my head. How do you not know this? It's like almost visually like explains itself. And then I asked my daughter and son-in-law. I didn't expect him to know as much. I did expect her to know. She didn't really know either. And I'm like,
So
okay.
define it for those that may be listening and not know what you're referring to.
Yeah, they're just not, I go onto LinkedIn and type in employee retention and look at all the articles, and not one of them talks about the fact that 73% of employees have some form of caregiving responsibility. Now, that could be, quote, just being a parent, not that that's easy. But there's, what is it? I think it's, let me look really quick. I can pull it up here. If I could read. I can't remember the percentage of people over 50 that are caring for somebody else. I'd have to read the whole thing. That won't work. But there's been more and more articles, like in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes and Business Insider, that are talking about the dual responsibilities that a lot of employees face. So I'm shocked that I'm not like busier than I'd care to be, because the solutions are really simple, not really super expensive. Mostly it just takes a little time. It's not like you're putting in like a whole department or, you
Yeah.
know, real. I mean, I almost don't like the word invest, because that sounds like, to me at least, sounds like a lot of money. And this is more shifting and thinking in a little bit of time.
I recently read that when you start a movement, which you're trying to do, a movement, you only need to convince 25% of your target audience, and then it becomes a snowball effect. So keep doing what you're doing.
Well, I have an agent, and we have a meeting the first and third Thursdays of the month. And so the last meeting we had, I was like, wait a minute, the title of my signature talk is wrong. We've changed it twice. I'm like, because we're talking about investing in employee caregivers, yada yada. Like, they don't even know that's a problem. Like,
Yeah.
we need to talk about it's like like, what is it? Something, it's the employee retention issue you don't really realize you have. Forget
Yeah.
exact. We've changed it so many times, I forget what we call it now.
Well, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And
Thank you.
for people that are watching this video, or you can read the full article on Authority Magazine, 5 Things I Wish I Knew as a Caregiver. You can get positive help from Jennifer Fink on her Fading Memories podcast. She's also available to speak on the topic. The website is Jen Finks Speaks. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's easier to type it than it is to say it.
JenFink speaks.com. Well, thank you so much for responding to the article and getting the word out, because I frankly am shocked at the number of responses I've had to this topic on Authority Magazine. There's so many people that are acting as caregivers, and they're kind of like hiding in little nooks and crannies around the country, and not nearly recognized or appreciated enough. So
There's 53 million of us,
yes,
and that's an undercount, because many people don't think of themselves as a caregiver, and I know that because I didn't think of myself as a caregiver. I was just doing what a loving daughter would do, and I
right.
went to my first caregiver support group, and she said, even if your loved one's in memory care, you're still a caregiver. And I was like, oh.
Yes, that's so true. That is so true. Well, Jennifer, thank you for the time you spent with me this afternoon and for addressing the issue. I wish you the very best with your passion to educate corporations as well as the rest of us.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.